21 minutes after 8 a.m. and I've already gotten so many messages and hits. But it's okay because I saw it when it dropped, because as most of you know, I've been very sick, which is why I look like a tragedy this morning. But I immediately watched it as soon as it dropped because I was awake. So yes, I've seen Ryan's new video. What I would like to stress are just a few important issues about how to compost what you're seeing on the felony registration on the TBI for sex offenders. So when you pull up their identification, everything they have is public information, from their address and everything. Address, charges. If they have a supervising officer, the supervising officer will be listed. If they just have to register and are not actively supervised, then it will say the local county sheriff department, where they have to register each year and register any changes in address in 24 hours. Any changes in vehicle, any changes have to be registered, and so they have a life that's very much public display. I will say that the rules constantly change. I did used to supervise sex offenders and murderers and every other level of offender that is possibly known to man. Supervision of sex offenders changes almost annually based on certain parameters and qualifications and training scenarios that are pushed by Tennessee. For the local sex offenders that I had, they couldn't live next to a church with a daycare, elementary school, anything that was inclined toward children or child-heavy family activities. But if they had that home for 30 years and then caught a charge, they were normally grandfathered to go back to that home, but they had to be monitored effectively if it was known they were going to be living in that home and there was a danger close by. Most people have to approve where they live. They can't live within certain structures. I believe the law when I supervised, but they couldn't work in anywhere with a play structure attached to the restaurant. So no Chuck E. Cheese, no McDonald's with a big play structure, nothing like that. If you're seeing that, definitely look for the supervising officer and report it. Or if it's just the county sheriff, report it immediately, because it may be a new charge, because many of them are not allowed to work in places like that. The grandfathering system does not work as leniently toward places like that. I will say that when you run into these people, for me, I've dealt with hundreds through my career. Many are people that, unlike this man seems to have caught violent, aggravated, malicious, malevolent charges, which should concern most parents, and you should be aware of how to access this knowledge and compost it and use it to benefit your family. But always know how to look this stuff up. Some offenders I've seen that could have also potentially caught horrendous charges if they could have afforded to have stayed in prison for 2 years awaiting trial. I've read the paperwork. I've seen the witness statements. I read everything that the DA and the state's prosecuting attorney and the defense uses in the trial for supervision. Many of them would have been able to have gotten it dismissed at trial had they pushed the issue. But many could not afford to stay in custody for 2 years and lose their home, their family, their business, everything they had attained. And predominantly the worst age group in men to get these convictions was 24 to 32. Now, mostly because men that age are looking for a specific thing, and they fall into easy traps with women who know how to manipulate and use that specific thing for engagement, attraction, and to take away a livelihood potentially. So there are many aspects and views you have to look at this at. So I have seen 16-year-old girls put 5 men in prison, but they get no charges and the parents get no neglect charges. And I've been deathly concerned about that because it seems like if that teenager was with men, older men, that much to engage in these deep relationships that have this level of contact and time, that the parents would have gotten an abuse or neglect charge. It didn't happen. I was confused, and I found out after many years in the court system that our court system is very much, though most of the time I was extremely pleased with my judge and proud of my judge, there were at certain times that I read paperwork that I knew had it gone to trial, it would have gone differently with a group of peers judging rather than a judge judging. And it was because at times our court systems here in the United States can be desperately financially inclined. And that means to say the more money you have to hire the fancier lawyers that can put the courts in more of a bind and kind of twist the legal system a little bit, and you can afford that, you can afford to go to court 17 times instead of twice, then you get a little bit of leniency because the court is tired of dealing with you and they will accommodate you after a battle. Most people don't have that luxury. They get a public defender, and that public defender does the bare minimum. Public defenders are great. I've known many a great one, but some of them just do the bare minimum, and they end up in custody for a long time and serving on paper for a long time because that public defender does the bare minimum. It's all a very individualistic case. It depends on the charges, the person, the lawyer, the judge's day in court. And a lot of people that are registered sex offenders did a plea deal, which means they didn't really go to trial. They did a plea deal to get out of custody, get on supervision, and because they couldn't wait 2 years for a trial. So a lot of them have been convicted via plea deal, which is still an admission of guilt, but it's an admission of guilt normally to something else than what was initially logged, which I've personally had a problem with, because I was like, if you're in court and you did this, but they're going to let you acknowledge this, isn't that still lying? Because this is not this, so shouldn't they make you do this? But anyway, they offered him a plea deal. Once again, it's a very individualistic program, and it is quite often financially motivated because lawyers are very expensive, and someone to defend you is very expensive. Now, as a family, I all the time tell parents you need to know how to look up these offenders, know who they are, know where they live, know where they're located, know where they work, in your area especially. If you're going to travel, it's open information. You might as well access it and use it to your benefit. At the same time, when I was supervising them, I had to also keep in check that they were individuals that still had bills to pay. They had supervision things to pay. They had restitution to victims to pay. And if I crippled their life, I crippled the healing of many other people's lives. And so I had to learn to mesh it together in my brain to deal with both sides, to benefit both parties. And that was easier for me to do once I got into work and began seeing how the court system worked. And it was easier for me to say, okay, I can have a working relationship with you to keep the public safe, to keep you safe, and to keep everyone getting what the court dictated that they needed, they deserved, which could be restitution to the victim. But they also have to pay for their mental health care, for their therapy that they have to take under state law. They have a lot of regulations upon them too, so they have a lot of stuff that they're forced to work to pay for, and therefore they have to work. It's very difficult for them to work. And so they get a lot of low-level menial jobs, and they fill that bracket for areas. And it's sad because there are companies that are bonded to work convicted felons that could work these people. But communities often go out with the red flags, the pitchforks, and fire, and they don't understand that when they stop them from working, they stop their victim from getting restitution, which then stops their victim from being able to afford therapy, which causes their victim's healing to cease. It's kind of a chain reaction. So I would always, when dealing with my offender, I would also, the family of the victim, say, if there are any issues, please call me immediately. We will take care of this immediately. The last thing I want is your life to be affected even more by someone that should be appropriately and adequately supervised. So if you see these offenders and you think they're doing anything wrong, please note that on their TBI page will be their supervising officer if they're actively being supervised. If they're not actively being supervised, they're just being registered every year. They still have to report changes to the local sheriff department, and they're responsible to the local sheriff department. Report any issues to the local sheriff department. Or if they're doing something like handling bodily fluids while working in a food facility, contact the Tennessee State Department of Health. But parents, be aware. Use the felony offender information to understand your communities and protect your children, and to know what is going on around you in your communities. And if this stupid beer flu would ever go away, I would say please go and witness a criminal or misdemeanor court date in your own community and watch how it goes, so that you have an understanding of the process that a lot of these people go through. To see it from when they're indicted and it goes through all the courts and ends up in criminal court, it's very eye-opening. So that's all I wanted to add. I don't really disagree or agree with anyone. It's a highly emotional thing to have to realize that we all have to function in this little stratus of society that we're all in. And it can be unnerving to understand that there are certain people out there that we have to cohabitate with, that we ordinarily would not choose to cohabitate with. But what it took me years as an adult to figure out is that we all fill in a certain niche in the society, in that stratus, in that little area of the caste system that we are in. And if we're all healthily aware and honest, and we report our issues clearly, then we can all maintain that little societal buffer, and we can all be okay. And that takes reporting issues to where they need to go. So again, supervising officer or the local county sheriff. Those are the two places you go with sex offenders. But I would also say Tennessee State Department of Health for the health concerns in the restaurant. That's creepy. And if that restaurant has a play area and he's not being supervised, then the county sheriff may need to know about that, because it could potentially be a new charge, depending on what his paperwork from court says and how he is to be dealt with. So that's my tips on that. It changes annually. It changes. The training was horrible to keep up with. The PSU officers that do this job are amazing people. It's difficult. It's hard for the community to understand what the officers have to go through, and it's hard for the community to understand what the offenders have to go through. But to get that trifecta to work well together is even more of an issue. So always give someone the option to talk you through an issue, because you may educate yourself to where your issue becomes a non-issue, or it changes into another issue. So once again, reporting officer, which should be on their TBI page, or local county sheriff. And I hope I feel better tomorrow and I can do more of a feedback, but this is just an ex-probation and parole officer that supervised sex offenders, murderers, and everybody, and giving my 2 cents, because it's a very touchy scenario. So everybody have a good day.